With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Welcome in, everybody. Happy Monday, and thank you so much for choosing to be with us and making us a part of your week as well. And we do have a special guest that's coming on in just a second to talk about a pressing issue that just happened in the Alabama House. But before we do, I did want to ask everybody to please pray for the city of Paris. For those of you who may not know, there is a fire in Notre Dame Cathedral. They're not exactly sure of the source of the fire. Local authorities do believe that it's more or less likely that it has something to do with the renovations that were going on inside the cathedral. Now, even if you're not Catholic, I'm certainly not Catholic, but this is a big deal. The historic significance of this cathedral is just beyond measure, and there could be some really important history that is unfortunately lost in this terrible fire. So they don't think it's terrorism. They don't think it's anything like that. They don't think it's intentional arson. It probably was just an accident that had to do with the renovations that were going on, but nonetheless, a really big loss for the city of Paris and really for the world when you think about the history that's gone on there. So please pray for the city of Paris and our neighbors across the pond. But that being said, we have quite a bit of local news to get to, and we are going to go ahead and introduce our special guest. He's Steve Long, and why don't you go ahead and tell us, Steve, a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely, Caleb. Absolutely. Glad to be here. Appreciate you asking me to be here. I'm Steve Long. A lot of folks know me through Cast and Blast Outdoors on Sports Radio 740 on Saturday morning from 7 to 9, replayed on 9 to 11 on Sunday. But I'm also,
great program.
I appreciate it so much, man. I'm also a regional director. I'm over Alabama and Mississippi for the Quality Deer Management Association. We're a nonprofit, 60,000 members wide. I also do a little bit of guiding. I've been in the outdoors all my life and basically making money for the last 20, 30 years. I've been in the hunting and fishing industry, so I have a great background in outdoors and in wildlife, but I don't have a degree in wildlife biology. But I would say that QDMA is my primary job.
Right. Well, I got to tell you, this is an area that I feel like I have a little bit of expertise in. I did you know that I'm a gun enthusiast first and foremost.
Well, you were brought up in the industry, if you ask me, with your father and everything,
well,
hunting and fishing in the outdoors. It's just like most of us from the great state of Alabama. I mean, most of us have been brought up hunting and fishing.
And you know better than most what an important part of the state's economy that this is. There's a lot of hunting and fishing tourism that happens right here in Alabama.
You're exactly right. You're looking at a $2 billion industry just here in the state of Alabama in hunting, and that doesn't include fishing. Hunting and fishing, there's 36,000 people that are employed due to the hunting industry or the fishing industry. So, you know, I don't know where that ranks statewide, but it's pretty large. It's a large part of our economy. Being a guide and guiding, I do deer guiding, hog guiding. My specialty's turkey or quail, and I do all that out of Great Southern Outdoors. I also do a little bit of personal stuff on the side. But we get people from all over. Alabama is blessed to have the deer herd that they have and the game that they have here in Alabama. We're blessed to have that. But a lot of people, we are a destination point across the nation and around the world. When people that love to hunt, that love the outdoors, that love to fish, I mean, you think about the freshwater fishing, the inshore fishing, the saltwater fishing. It's huge. There's a large economic impact here in Alabama. We're blessed to have this.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And even when you think about other tourism that goes on in the state, tourism to go to the beach, you know, around the Gulf Coast, even a lot of that has to do with the deep sea fishing that you're talking about there. So, I mean, there's just no way to even quantify how important this is to our state.
It's such a trickle effect, and people don't realize it. When they cross that state line, they're going to be using hotels, they're going to buy gasoline, they're going to be eating in restaurants, they're going to be stopping by convenience stores, buying product. They even go to our outdoor stores, they go shopping. You know, if you look down there on the Gulf Coast, you have you have all these shopping centers, you have the outlets down there,
Right.
and it's huge. I mean, a lot of it's not even measured. I mean, I'm sure they're estimating at the $2 billion, but it might even be more than that. And that's a lot of money. It's a big economic impact for this state. Employs a lot of people. So hunting and fishing are very important, and what we do and how we take care of it is very important. We need to make sure that future stays strong.
And that's absolutely true. And I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but I do want to just mention this. It really irks me when people that claim to be environmentalists and experts on it talk about hunters and fishers and other conservationists as though they're doing something wrong to the land and though they're doing something that harms the animals, harms the land. And I'm sitting there thinking, you're telling me that a bureaucrat that lives in Washington, D.C. knows more about how to preserve land than a guy that spent basically his entire childhood and a large portion of his adult life hunting in the woods. You're telling me he cares more about it than the other guy does in preserving that legacy for his family.
When you talk about that, we hunters and anglers, we take care of ourselves. I mean, I'm thinking about the Department of Conservation. We're very, very blessed to have the people that we have in the Department of Conservation. And, they get no money from the general budget, none whatsoever. They
completely self-sustaining.
Absolutely, it's off of license sales, whether it be fishing. They have the state parks. It's huge. I mean, but they sustain themselves. They're not looking at us. A lot of people say, well, a license is a tax. I mean, if you live here in the state of Alabama, you can get a year-long hunting license, all game, for $27. That's a deal. That is a deal.
With our resources, it absolutely is.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the liberal season and you look at the amount of game that we have, we do have a lot of game. But, I know you really want to discuss something else that's going on as far as, the baiting bill that's come up.
Right, and that was really the reason that I brought you in, because I do have some expertise in it, but I really wanted to bring in someone that's a bona fide expert and outdoorsman that spends a lot more time with it than I do, because I thought you could speak a little bit more intelligently on the practical side of this. I was wondering about this bill. I've never baited before when hunting, and I haven't gone hunting all that much, to be honest. So just what would the effects be if you started allowing people to hunt with this bill? What would the effect be overall on both the ecosystem and also on the hunters and the herds themselves?
Well, there's a lot of negatives to baiting, and when you think about it, right now the state, for deer, you can be 100 yards and out of sight. To me, that's baiting. I wasn't happy with that. The legislature has tried to push this bill for the last 9 or 10 years, and it's been being fought for 9 or 10 years. But the negatives are, you have a piece of property. It will sustain so much wildlife. Mother Nature takes care of herself. She takes care of it. It becomes overpopulated. You have disease come in. There's just not enough food there for those animals to survive. Alabama is very well blessed. I mean, if you think about the temperature and the area, there's a lot of green. And we'll go to white-tailed deer. Sure. White-tailed deer do not have any problems finding food around here. Do we have an overpopulation? Yeah, you might have some in some areas, but not many. Not many. Also, if you look through the years, you've got coyotes have come in, and then you've got wild hogs or pigs, whatever you want to call them, both the same thing. Right. They've populated into the state of Alabama, and a lot of people.
And that's actually the other side of this bill. A lot of people are talking about the deer side, but this would allow for baiting for feral hogs as well.
Let me tell you, the baiting is not a solution to maintain the hog population or decrease the hog population. Sitting in a deer stand, shooting hogs over bait is not gonna cut back the hog population one bit. Let me tell you about a pig. A pig becomes sexually mature at 6 months of age. It can have 2.5 litters a year, 6 to 10 in a litter. There's no way. And I'm going to tell you, that's a smart animal, a very smart animal. That pig's nose, there's no other animal in the woods that has a nose like a pig. I know. I've hunted them. I hunt them on the ground. I mean, I don't sit in a stand. I like to be on the ground. I like to stalk hunt pigs when I hunt pigs. I'm not a huge pig hunter, but I do know by guiding on pig hunts, and at Great Southern Outdoors, we've baited. We got feeders out. We got multi-feeders out. We've got lights on them. We hunt them at night, during the day. And these pigs, once you start shooting them at a feeder, they stop coming in. They stop coming in. I believe it's Representative Crawford who made the comment, and then last year it was Representative Williams out of South Alabama said the reason he wanted the bill to pass was to control the hog population or knock it back. It's not going to do it. If anything, it's going to explode it. One, you're feeding pigs. The more food they've got out there, the more they're going to multiply. And hunting them in a stand over bait is not going to do it. The only way to do it is trapping. That's the only way to control the hog population. Now, there's been several studies out there down in Louisiana, Texas, University of Auburn. They've been trying to figure out a poison to put out for the pigs and that won't affect the other animals, and they just haven't found it yet.
Right.
So it's this is not the solution to what they're bringing up. Now, conservation, we've got Chris Blankenship as our commissioner. Great guy, has done a fantastic job. Chuck Sykes, our director, same thing. Chuck is a biologist. Chuck knows it. Chuck has fought this for 8 years. But I think that he could see the light at the end of the tunnel. He's not going to be able to kill it anymore. And the reason the Conservation Department is not speaking out against it this time is because there's a fee put on the end of it. When you buy your license, you have an option of buying a license to hunt over bait. Resident is $15 and non-resident is $51. So that's revenue. One thing about the hunting industry, and now, Caleb, I can go on this for a while.
That's all right. Keep going. That's why you're here.
Exactly. The hunting industry, if you look at license sales nationwide, they've declined. I mean, we went from 14.5 million hunters to 11.5 million hunters in 5 years. Alabama has followed that suit. They have followed that suit. Do you realize that only 4%, it's under 4% of the residents in Alabama buy a hunting license? Now, you've got people over 65 years of age that don't have to buy a license anymore. You've got landowners that own land. They don't have to buy a license to hunt on their own land. So, you know a lot of people that hunt, but when you hear the under 4%, it shocked me. I guess I run with a bunch of redneck hunters, and all my buddies are redneck hunters, So I'm thinking, hey, everybody hunts, but they don't. The good thing on that, 85% of the non-hunters agree with hunting. So that leaves 15% of that group that sort of object to hunting. So, we got a great conservation, and they saw this, and that's why they put that fee on there. I mean, I know Chuck and Chris negotiated this deal so they could bring revenue into the conservation. They said, heck, if we're going to get it, we might as well make a positive out of it. But in the end, there's just no telling what's going to happen. I mean, do I think it'll be the end of whitetail deer hunting in the state of Alabama? No, I don't. I just don't think it's right. It's not hunting. It's not hunting. As the generations have changed, it's amazing to see how hunting has changed and fishing has changed.
Sure.
I started hunting back in the 70s. I'm not telling my age, but back in the 70s, I started hunting just like your dad.
Right.
Of course, he's more of a fisherman. And technology has come such a long way. I'm known as a turkey hunter around here and across the Southeast. And decoys. They legalized decoys. And, man, I thought that was the worst thing. Alabama was the last state to legalize decoys. I mean, these turkeys, some of them get killed over decoys. Turkey hunting, we're not hunting for the meat. We're hunting for the game.
Right.
When I say the game, the hunt. That's the important thing with a turkey hunt. And I thought that was wrong. But technology has gotten into hunting. When you look at game cameras, you look at feeders. I have a map on my phone. Yeah, I have fell for some of it. There's an app called Onyx that tells me where all the property lines are. So I make sure I stay on wherever I'm supposed to be. That's where I'm going to be. And so the technology has changed. You're seeing people that want a lot more self-gratification, at least the younger generation. So they're going to use every item they possibly can to help them hunt. Whereas I used to have to read sign. I used to have to go in the woods. I used to have to scout. I used to have to look. I didn't have a game camera to tell me what was there. The one thing that amazes me about a game camera is that regardless what it gets pictures of, you're not going to change it one bit. It's not going to make that. And I always like the element of surprise. And plus, bucks do roam come rut, the mating season. The bucks, they'll roam a long way sometimes. So, but yeah, I'm just not for the baiting bill. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I think you got to give the animal a chance. Just to give you a little comparison on the corn, it's like having that 15-cent Snicker bar on the counter at the convenience store when you walk in there. Sure. You had no intention whatsoever to go in there, but by God, you see it, you're going to buy it. You're going to, hey, that looks good. Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah. These
As
deer,
you can see, I fall victim to that from time to time.
Yeah. But these deer, that's the same thing with them. Mm-hmm. They love corn. They love to eat it. Pigs, same thing. But I'm going to tell you, one thing that's going to happen is that you're going to see deer become more nocturnal. Deer is really normally a low, I call it first light, last light. That's when you're going to see the majority of your animals anyway, except for a turkey. A turkey, he flies up to roost, sleeps all night, flies down during the day.
Well, I mean, that's why hunters get up so early in the morning, is so they can be in the stand by the time sunrise. That's when they're real active.
Exactly right. So once you start feeding corn, and the deer start learning, hey, this isn't a great place. This isn't a great place to be. I saw Betty Sue just get a bullet put in her, and I'm not coming back till it gets dark. These guys don't ever come around in the dark. So you'll see the deer start to become more nocturnal. States that have legalized hunting over bait, that have experience with this, have all said their deer numbers have declined, or their harvest numbers have declined.
Right.
And their pig population has exploded. And that's what I don't understand about. I love the guys down there at the legislature, but last year, Representative Crawford, Representative Williams, I went to a legislative reception on the lawn down at the Capitol, and I had a booth set up and everything, and he sponsored the bill last year out of South Alabama. And I said, why do you want this? He said, well, I want to do it to control my hogs. And I said, sir, I've been guiding for 20 years, and putting bait out and sitting over a bait pile to kill hogs is not going to control it. It's going to explode it. And he just wouldn't listen to me. Tom Watley over in Auburn in Lee County, Senator Watley.
Used to be my senator.
Yep. Yeah. Great guy. Great guy. I interviewed him on Cast and Blast Outdoors 9 years ago. He was one of the first guys to introduce a bill to hunt over bait. Mm-hmm. And he said, I had him on the radio show. I said, are you a hunter? He said, no, I'm not a hunter. And I said, well, why are you doing this? He said, well, the people I represent want this. And, I just that didn't sit well with me.
Well, and that's the thing. It seems as though they have good intent, and you and the people that you're talking about want the same thing. You agree that there's a problem and that there should be a solution to the problem. You just disagree on the way to get there. And it looks like we have a call, so why don't we go ahead and go to the phones. Good afternoon. What's your name? Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
There you are. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up something, Steve, that you talked about just a minute ago, that I think is a problem that's starting to happen now with regard to the number of hunters that we have. And I look at things, I can't help it. I was an ag teacher for 27 years. And one of the problems we have now is we have fewer ag teachers teaching the hunter ed program. And one of the reasons we do is because it's gone online, and now you can take the thing online as opposed to taking it in an ag class, which is way better. And the reason I think that is because we spent plenty of time on it. And in that time, a lot of interest was created among our young people. I know I had it through the years. Many of them that were not hunters to start with would end up being hunters before it was over with. And because of that influence, but now, since so many people just try to do that thing online and fast pace it through, they don't get the original intent of the course. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I can agree with you. I mean, lifestyle has changed. John, when you and I were young, we had baseball season in the spring and maybe a little bit of the summer, and then it was over. Now these kids have a full year. They have travel ball. They have fall ball. They got football season. They got the computer. They're doing these games on the computer, and there's just not a lot of exposure. And if you look at the price of hunting, I've discussed this with a lot of people. A lot of people have discussed this with me. Michael Waddell and Eddie Salter were with me 2 weeks ago, and it's not cheap to be a hunter. I mean, it might be even cheaper.
No.
Hey, John, it might be cheaper to be a golfer and join a country club. I'm not sure, but because I'm not a golfer. But sometimes after hunting, I get frustrated. I want to be a golfer. That's what I tell when I'm turkey hunting. I don't hear a turkey. I'm like, man, maybe I should take up golf. But I just think
you may not be able to hit the golf hole, but it's always there. You never have to worry about it not showing up.
That's right. But, I just think these kids have a lot more exposure to different things than what you and I did when they're growing up. And I think the expense of it keeps them back or holds them back. But
one thing that isn't an expense that I've championed about this thing, and you've heard me say it on your show, I still think the hunter license ought to be higher. And the reason I do is because it is essentially stayed pretty much the same, and maybe you know more of the history of it, but it's not a lot different now than it was when we were growing up.
Well,
a car when we were growing up was, when I was 16, a good car was $7,000 or $8,000, and try to buy a used one with $200,000 on it for that now. You won't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Especially those trucks, man. Those Chevy Z71s. I can't believe what they still bring. Wish I still had mine.
Any of them are $50,000 or $60,000.
Yes, yes.
no matter which one you buy.
Well,
You
to go back on the price of the license, and that's why I think conservation jumped on this, because Chuck was on our show probably 3 or 4 months ago, and we were talking about license and increasing on license.
Mhm.
There's a law on the books that they can only go up a very, very small percentage, and I mean, I think it's like 2 or 3% a year. And how much would that be on $26? You know, it's just not that big of an effect. Whereas this, you're looking at $15, and then it's going to be matched 3-1 by the feds. It's a good lick for the conservation. And our conservation, I'm telling you, they are good folks. I think the world of both those guys. I mean, everybody down there, our game wardens are doing a great job. You know, I'm not going to say they're underpaid, because they are paid a lot better now than what they used to be. But they, you know, when the tornado happened over there in Lee County and Beauregard, game wardens were the first to respond. One of the first to respond over there. They respond to all types things that happen across the state. So I do understand Chuck's thoughts on it. Chuck has really been sort of quiet about it. Chris hasn't. You know, and basically he has said the same thing that I'm saying, that, hey, you know, it's coming, whether we like it or not.
Let me tell you something about Chuck. Chuck's one of the most annoying people in the world to hunt beside when you're in the dove field.
Yeah.
Because he can hit the things, and John from Millbrook can't.
Yeah, well, then you need to go with Chris, because Chris is a better fisherman than he is a hunter.
Yeah, well, let me tell you this. That rascal can sit over there and shoot all of them, and I was glad when he got a limit, and then I could actually maybe try to hit one every once in a while.
You know, Chuck...
but he's cool. He's cool, though. He takes an Aussie with him to be his retriever.
Yeah. I believe that's either Sydney. Yeah, I believe that's Sydney. Matter of fact, I took Chuck quail hunting last year. We had several folks out there. We had Brian Murphy with QDMA, our CEO, Chuck, Chris, the head of the advisory board was with us, and a couple other, Calvin Cherry, a local banker here. He was a banker at that time. But anyways, we took them out there, and he brought Sid out there, the Australian Shepherd, and we had Sid pointing and retrieving.
I do love some Aussies.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that was pretty cool. I mean, Chuck is definitely an outdoorsman. Matter of fact, I'm going to be hunting with him Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in Mississippi, and going to have a chance to go turkey hunting with Chuck over there.
What about that you're changing the percentage? They can do whatever they want, can't they?
Well, I mean, the legislature could go in there and change
they could.
It. Yeah, absolutely.
Which, I mean, and thank you so much for your call. I do appreciate it. If revenue is the problem, you would think that they would look at that first and changing that law rather than changing the licensing. But if I could just play devil's advocate with you here for a second, what about the argument that everybody's basically doing it anyway, and this law is very hard to enforce? And so essentially what's happening is the argument goes that the law abider is actually being punished, because if your neighbor, for example, is baiting and you're not, and he's just not getting caught, he's drawing all your deer off of your property onto his. So wouldn't legalizing it give the person a chance to legally bait and sort of even the odds? You know, and that's one of the problems you're going to get into. I'm not trying to use the redneck terminology, because this show's got a little bit of class to it. It's a contest. You haven't watched the show much, have you? Well, you get the landowner's going to get in a pissing contest, is what I call it. Who's got the most money? Who's got the most money? And that's one of the negatives to it right there. You're going to have one guy trying to outbait the other guy. You're going to have so much corn out there, it's going to increase the predator population. It's so funny, these guys put these game cameras out. I'm not a game camera guy. I mean, I don't have a problem with them. I think they're fine. A lot of people like to use them. But you're going to have these guys out there with their game cameras. What they're going to see explode is the raccoon population. What do raccoons do in the springtime? They go eat turkey eggs. And we've got a decline of the turkey population in this state. There is a disease, or aflatoxin, that comes on this corn, that if it's not handled right, turkeys can die from this. It can make them very sick, and they can die from it. You know, by spreading the corn out on the ground. We don't have CWD. I'm not going to use CWD as a threat on this, but if we ever do get it, and I will say this, the commissioner, if we get a case of CWD in this state, the commissioner has the right
to shut baiting down or shut feeding down. He can shut it down in the county that's discovered, and I believe within a 50-mile or 100-mile radius, he can shut it down. Now, Mississippi has CWD. Tennessee
now
has
go a
CWD.
little bit more in detail on that for my viewers that aren't necessarily outdoorsmen.
Well, CWD is a disease and it was discovered, I believe, back in the early 70s in the state of Colorado. That was the first state that had it. It was out west, Wisconsin, and I'm not going to say it's devastating, but it's a disease somewhat like mad cow disease. I'm not a biologist. I can get into prions and how you get it and everything like that, but it'll put a dent in your herd. And not only that, they're not sure if the meat's safe to eat with a deer having CWD. There's a lot of things they do not know about CWD, and they're working on it. They're trying to do now in Mississippi and even in Alabama, we have testing sites. So you can take the only way to test a deer for CWD is you got to kill the deer and you got to get brain tissue. You got to get brain tissue to test that deer. And every deer they've tested so far in Alabama has been negative. Now, Tennessee's been pretty strong. Right there on the Tennessee-Mississippi line has been very, very strong. So
it's something that is a potential problem, but as far as we know, baiting really wouldn't cause a problem with this specifically. It could maybe spread other diseases, but not that. Am I correct?
Well, no, it could spread CWD, and that's one of the ways they're thinking that it's being done is through bait piles. You know, the deer touch noses or they leave saliva or urine. That's another thing. I mean, the transmitting of disease. I mean, you got hemorrhagic disease here in the state of Alabama. We do have that. I mean, but it's not going to wipe out your herd. It's not going to wipe it out. But at the same time, you know, you don't want any animal to suffer like that. You don't want to have that disease here.
Sure.
And you know what happens too, Caleb? I'm going to tell you something. Sorry about bumping your.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, camera there.
People think I'm doing special effects here.
Whoa. But anyways, one of the things that will hurt if we do ever have CWD or a disease problem, it's going to hurt economically. And let me tell you what, the mom and pop stores, the grocery stores where all these hunters come in, that Alabama is a destination, it's going to thin out. They're going to say, well, they got CWD, man. We're not going there. We're not going there. What was the question you just asked me? You said, yes, there's bait out there. There's a lot of people that put out bait. Me, myself, I mean, I live on 800 acres in Macon County in an old antebellum home, but my front yard, I have 2 feeders out there. They're gravity feeders. The corn doesn't, they eat it out of a trough. They don't eat it out of on the ground. Right. And I just do it to watch the deer. I don't hunt over it. I mean, I'm not going to hunt over it. Nobody's going to hunt around it. So, yes, you see a lot of people. I mean, when you go into Academy Sports, they'll have pallets of corn. You see a lot of mom and pop stores across the state. They sell deer corn. So, yes, you're exactly right. But, you know, everybody's going 80 miles per hour on the interstate. Should we legalize it?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. And that's actually, it's very similar to, I won't get off into all the details on this. People will kind of use the same thing for the marijuana debate. And I'll say, well, the idea that, well, because something is good or bad, you're not speaking to the merit of it by saying, well, we should just legalize it and then it won't be illegal. Well, yeah, then it won't be illegal, but the question is, what are the ramifications once you make it legal? Well, and that's the thing that people have to consider whenever they make an argument like that.
You know, Caleb, Rob, who's my radio partner, Rob Newman, him and I have talked about this bill. And Rob is more of a bow hunter. He's more of a whitetail deer hunter than I am. I'm more of a turkey and a quail guy than he is. But, you know, we all have our strong points. But Rob loves to bow hunt. And the first thing Rob thinks about, this will make it a lot easier for him. He'll be able to bring the deer in closer by having that bait pile there. And, you know, Rob said, Steve, would you buy the permit? Oh, yeah, I'd buy it. I'd buy it because I'd have to. If I want to hunt deer, I got to quit hitting that thing. If I want to hunt deer, you know, if I want to have deer on my property, I'm going to have to. And, you know, they say the majority of people are against this. I mean, from surveys they've done across the nation and the state, majority of folks are against hunting over bait. But when the legislature passes this and it goes through, everybody's going to do it. They're going to do it. And yes, you do have a good bit of people. 100 yards out of sight right now. So will it change up much? I don't know, but it will definitely bring in more revenue for our conservation department. So I'm against it, but at the same time, if it passes, it's not going to be the end of my hunting career.
Well, I would have predicted that regardless of what you said. I would have known that wasn't going to stop you from hunting. But Well, I do appreciate you bringing your expertise in, and hopefully we're all a little bit more knowledgeable about it. I feel like I have a better handle on this bill and some of the pros and cons. If somebody has heard what they, heard about what you're saying and they like your expertise on this, they want to get more about this, how do they listen to Cast and Blast? How can they get more involved with the program?
Well, absolutely. We have a Facebook page, Cast and Blast Outdoors. We post pictures on there and articles of the outdoors and fishing. We've got several guide services. We got fishing services, fishing guides on there, and also news just like this, like the baiting bill. When the article comes out, it's on there, but just go to our Facebook page, Cast and Blast Outdoors, Saturday morning, 7 to 9 on Sports Radio 740.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody down in South Alabama, we're on the Power Pig 101.1 FM. And if you go to, Caleb, I don't know if the station would like this, but I listen to Sports Radio 740 on iHeartRadio. I do a lot of traveling in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. And when I'm traveling and I want to hear Joe Hunk and Russell Terry in the afternoon, I go to iHeartRadio and I hit Sports Radio 740. So,
oh yeah, you can catch us on the app. You can catch us on iHeart. News Radio 1440 is on there too. So yeah, any way that you want to listen, we appreciate it.
And if you want to get my number or my email, I'm on qdma.com. If you're a deer hunter, a whitetail deer hunter, if you're an outdoor enthusiast, I encourage you to join QDMA. When it comes to education and research, nobody touches us, and we're dead set against it. But if it happens, it happens. We're all going to keep going on. But there might be some negatives to it. There are some negatives to it.
Mm-hmm.
So just be prepared. I will say this real quick. It passed through the House Thursday. There's several different versions of the bill, but one bill passed through the House Thursday, and it should be going to the Senate sometime soon. But it's always been defeated in the Senate, so it may lose. I don't think so. I think it's got a lot of steam. I think since conservation's got some money that will be coming to them, and yes, everybody's going to purchase that. They're not going to say a whole lot or be negative about it because they do need the revenue. With license sales down, they're looking at some way that they can make up for that money, and it's going to be a nice little hit for them.
Well, even more than the money, even though that's a concern too, I got to tell you, I'm concerned about what you were just talking about. I didn't realize that we had lost 4 million hunters in the past 5 years
nationwide. Yes.
See,
yes.
That's gonna if it stays in that trend, that is going to be detrimental to the conservation efforts in all the states.
Well, that trend has slowed down. It has slowed down. And that's the last 5 years. We had a little hiccup in the economy at one time, and it seems like that
probably didn't help it.
No. And it's just like we said, hunting and fishing's not cheap. I mean, to me, fishing's a little bit cheaper, but if you want to get out here and hunt, if you don't own land, most of the time you're looking at joining a club or or purchasing a lease or purchasing land, and then you got to have a gun, and then you got to have bullets, you got to have the camo. A lot of guys want the camera and the feeders and everything that goes with it, so it's not cheap.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Steve. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime I can come on and help you out, man, I no problem whatsoever. And like I say, folks, you want to get in contact with me, slong@qdma.com is my email. My phone number is 334-235-6393. If I don't answer, leave a message, and I'll call you back.
And be sure to listen to him on Cast and Blast Saturday mornings on our sister station, Sports Radio 740.
Yes, sir. Please do that. We appreciate y'all.
All right. We're going to go to a break here in just a second, and we'll be back.
Abby Johnson is in the other room.
Here.
Our first order of business is to present Planned Parenthood's Employee of the Year Award. Abby Johnson.
This is Abby. She's our newest volunteer escort. Abby, this is Cheryl D'Alessandro.
I'd be the youngest director in Planned Parenthood history.
You'll actually be in charge of the abortions at your clinic.
I have a chance to make a real difference.
No matter what you do for the rest of your life, you're still going to be a baby killer.
The only thing that's changed is you, Abby. Can you even hear yourself talk right now about these procedures? These are little babies.
I'm not going to apologize for doing a job that helps women in crisis.
There's still a part of me that isn't sure.
I know. But the one thing that all experts agree on is that at this stage, the fetus can't feel anything.
Sorry to bother you, but they need an extra person in the back room. Are you free? I saw it. It was like it was twisting and fighting for its life.
We commend the souls of these hundreds of children. And Lord, we pray to end abortion.
I really appreciate what you've done for us. I'll not forget it.
22 1,000 abortions. How do I even comprehend that?
Rough day at the office?
You can say that.
It's your dad and me. You are our baby from the moment of conception.
We are paying you to be a perfect instrument of corporate policy. We are an abortion provider.
I can't be a part of this anymore. Everything that they told us is a lie.
Don't underestimate the repercussions of this. You gotta be careful.
Rhonda, please don't do this! Rhonda!
Let me tell you what's gonna happen if you walk through that door.
Congratulations. You've made an enemy of one of the most powerful organizations on the planet.
And welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us through the break. Glad to get caught up with my buddy Steve Long from Sports Radio 740. And like I said, if you are interested in hearing more about him, they do a hunting and fishing show every Saturday morning on Sports Radio 740. I believe they start at 7 a.m. So be sure to check that out. 2 hours, Steve and his buddy Rob, they just talking about hunting. And it's something that they're passionate about, so we encourage you to do that. By the way, did want to mention as well, for legal purposes, that the Unplanned movie is not an official sponsor of Tactics. They don't have any real association with us. They told me they were fine with me playing their ad, but they don't sponsor me. The reason that I run their ads during my show is because I want to help them. I want to support them. And they are continuing to show in 1,400 theaters. Their number actually went up. Now, I want you to think about this because this never happens with movies. The number of screens their movie was playing on went up this weekend. More theaters carried them than they did on opening weekend. That just never happens. This thing is continuing to make money. This thing is continuing to get people to go out and see it. Its numbers are doing extremely well. It's already made well over 4 times its original budget. And so it just seems as though this thing is starting to snowball. It's starting to really get some traction. And it already had an opening weekend that made more than they ever thought that it would. And it's continuing to do really well, which is really encouraging to see. And yet, people on the left are continuing to fight it. And we won't spend a lot of time on this story, but it's worth mentioning that over the weekend, some people noticed something interesting when they Googled the Unplanned movie. You know, certain things, when you Google them, they don't just give you links, they'll give you something on the side, like if it's a famous person, they might give you a little blurb, a biography of the person via Google. Well, they do that for movies too. So if you were to search for The Lion King, it'll give you a little thing on the side that'll give you the date and what time or how long it runs and its rating, that kind of thing. I mean, you're familiar with this if you've ever Googled a movie. Unplanned is no different. But here's one thing that is very different about it. This weekend, there were people that were searching the Unplanned movie and saw something a little strange going on. Under genre, it had propaganda. That was the way that it defined the genre of this movie. Now, this is something that, to my knowledge, they don't have another classification for it. So far as I know, maybe I'm incorrect on this, but if you Google Vice, the controversial narrative that they put together about Dick Cheney, it's not really a documentary because it doesn't have to do with, it's just not the documentary format. It's more of a narrative. And despite it being very unflattering to Vice President Cheney, it's not listed as propaganda. The movie that we talked about a couple years ago that was actually nominated for Best Picture, that really glorified homosexuality and pedophilia, that wasn't listed as propaganda. Brokeback Mountain isn't listed as propaganda. There are lots of political films, for example, Fahrenheit 9/11, that Michael Moore put out. That's not listed as propaganda. So the question is, how does a movie that has political elements to it, but isn't overtly political, how is it that that movie is listed as propaganda? In a statement Google released, they tried to explain this and said, well, what happened is we have a system in place at Google that it goes through things that different people have said about the movie, and it basically created a genre. It created a different category for the Unplanned movie because of the things people were saying about it. Now, normally, even though I think that it's incorrect and I think these algorithms are biased and it's garbage in, garbage out, in other words, the person making the algorithm is biased and kind of leans left, and because of that, when you get the results of certain things being banned, it seems to only happens to conservatives. It's not as though there is a person that is liberal and doesn't like conservative messages and is going through them and saying, oh, I don't like that one, let's ban it. Generally speaking, when social media or big tech has done that in the past and they say that it's the algorithm, I'll say, okay, well then the algorithm is messed up and your bias is coming through in the product that you created, in this case, the algorithm. But when it comes to this one, I'm calling BS. I am. I don't think that this is true. I think that they actually labeled it propaganda because it seems weird to me that they would allow their system to invent a new genre. That just doesn't seem like something that the computer program would do that you would even include as a part of the program. And so normally, when Facebook or Twitter, even when they censored me, when they said, well, it was an accident and our algorithm came out with that, okay, that's fine. I don't believe that there are actual Facebook employees going through conservative news sites posts and saying, okay, well, we don't like that one. That one's saying something that we don't like, and so we're going to ban that. I do believe that it really is the algorithm, and sometimes the algorithm, even though it's garbage in, garbage out, sometimes it makes a mistake and bans something that a Facebook or a Google or a Twitter employee wouldn't actually want to delete if they saw it themselves. It's just that the algorithm recognized something incorrectly. 9 times out of 10, when they claim that, I believe them. And I've been pretty consistent on that. But on this one, I'm just calling it. I don't think that they're telling the truth. I think they're lying about this. And the reason that I say that is it just seems so odd to me that they would have even built the program in such a way that it would have created a completely new genre of movie and singled out specifically the one that happens to be very conservative and pro-life. I mean, that just to me does not seem like something that Google would do. And I'm not an expert on it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not professing to be. I don't know what Google's algorithm actually does on this stuff. But I'm just saying my spider senses are tingling, and I'm usually pretty close to accurate on this. And we'll probably never know. We'll probably never know whether I'm right on this or not, but I think they're lying. I think that somebody specifically put it in that genre. I don't believe that this was a computer algorithm. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But it seems so far-fetched to me that I think that this one, they're probably lying about it. And it's just one more example, like Twitter, like YouTube, or no, YouTube actually hasn't tried to censor this one specifically, but Twitter has already had problems with them, deleted their account accidentally. And that one, it might have actually been the algorithm based on the explanation that they gave. And I said that at the time when I was covering the story, but it just seems to me awful convenient to blame the algorithm on this one when it seems like this is not something that you would have even allowed the algorithm to make a decision on. It's just so odd that that would be the case. Because generally speaking, movie genres are kind of well known and there's not that many of them. And so the idea that somebody would build a computer program specifically to determine what genre a movie is just seems kind of odd. I don't buy into that. But nonetheless, that's where we are. And despite facing an incredible uphill battle against TV networks and social media and basically everyone in Hollywood, this movie continues to turn heads. It continues to get talked about, and people are continuing to go see it. It's continuing to make money long after its opening weekend in numbers similar to its opening weekend. And it's continuing to grow and actually be featured in more theaters, not less, the longer time seems to go on. So it's defying all the odds despite having everything stacked against it. And I do really commend the people over at PureFlix for sticking with this movie and making it, because it did take some courage to do so. Now, another bit of local news. There was an FEC report that came out earlier today that showed some interesting things about everybody's favorite senator, Doug Jones. So, according to this new report, it seems like Doug Jones is getting very little of his funding from the state of Alabama. Now, we already suspected this and had some numbers to back it up. You'll remember we actually talked about this story, I think, maybe 2 weeks ago, that it looks like Doug Jones was doing an awful lot of fundraising outside of the state of Alabama. Well, now we have the FEC report for the latest quarter, and it shows that Jones is only getting about $107,122 fundraising from the state of Alabama. Now, to put that into perspective, that brings his total of fundraising that he did this past quarter of money coming into his campaign from Alabama at roughly 12%, which means that 88% of his funding is coming from somewhere that is not Alabama. Now, I want you to think about that. This guy is a senator from the state of Alabama, and yet most of his funding is coming from somewhere else. And we actually have a pretty good idea of where that is. There are several states even that got more money into the Doug Jones campaign fund than the state of Alabama did. For example, 17% of the donations that came into Doug Jones accounts were from California, and then 16% from New York, and oddly enough, 13% from Texas. Now, that's not terribly surprising because Texas is a big state, and even though it happens to be fairly red, there's an awful lot of blue in Texas, especially around the big cities, particularly Austin and Houston. And so when you're looking at that, there are 3 states in this country that actually gave more money to Doug Jones' campaign than his home state of Alabama. That just gives you a pretty good indication that his interests are not in the state of Alabama. That people in other states don't really see him as an Alabama senator or somebody that will uphold the values of Alabama. They are more concerned with, and I think are right to do so, they think that he is just a Democrat senator that will do what the Democrats want. And by the way, so far, his voting record seems to bear that out. I mean, when you're more liberal, Doug Jones has a more liberal voting record than Elizabeth Warren. You're not doing real well on the conservative scale when you're beating Elizabeth Warren when it comes to liberal voting. And we covered that a few weeks ago about how bad his voting record is. And one of his biggest individual donors on this is actually a guy named Jonathan Soros. And before you ask, yes, he is related to George Soros. He's his son. That's part of the big contribution that was coming in from the state of New York. And about 26% came in from various PACs. Now, it is funny that most Democrats, and there's a handful of exceptions, not many, but there's a handful of exceptions to this, they'll always talk about how evil money is in politics and how we need to get money out of politics, and yet they'll take all kinds of money from super PACs while actually declaring that super PACs shouldn't be allowed. Now, even if a politician that's a Democrat wound up getting beat, and even if I disagreed with his policies, I would at least respect him if he said that he's not going to take money from PACs and then didn't. In fact, one thing that I do admire about Bernie Sanders is that he didn't take his campaign wasn't funded primarily from big donors. He got a lot of small individual donations. Still think that he's batcrap crazy. Still think that he doesn't need to be anywhere near the White House. But at least I do respect that he has some level of consistency on that, even if he lacks consistency in virtually every other aspect of his life and political career. But this is a good explanation of why Doug Jones' votes do not reflect Alabama values, because his campaign is bought and paid for by people that don't live in the state of Alabama and don't care about Alabama values. Do you really think that a bunch of Californians are sitting there going, you know what, we should give a lot of money to Doug Jones because we really want the state of Alabama to be adequately represented in Washington, D.C.? No. I mean, most of the people in California right now would rather that Alabama wouldn't have any representation if they could get away with it. In fact, there's a very big move amongst liberals now to eliminate the Electoral College, which would pretty much negate any good going to the state of Alabama to campaign would do. I mean, if that's the case, you just go to a bunch of population centers and you would just fly right over Alabama and most of the other states in favor of going to large cities to try to get out as much vote to win the popular vote as possible. And so you can't convince me that the people in New York and California and Texas are deeply concerned with the state of Alabama being adequately represented and our values reflected in our elected officials, and that's why they gave money to Doug Jones. Now, Lord knows I've had my differences with Richard Shelby. In fact, I was pulling against his primary opponent this past time that he got reelected. Not a huge Senator Shelby fan. But you know what? At least he gets his money from the state of Alabama. And I've said for a long time now, the greatest beneficiary of Doug Jones being a senator is Richard Shelby. Because Richard Shelby was sort of I won't say a moderate Republican, because especially in the past several years, he had a more conservative record than a lot of Republicans in the Senate, but he certainly wasn't Jeff Sessions or Ted Cruz or Mike Lee. But I got to tell you, ever since Doug Jones got in there, Richard Shelby, I mean, the guy looks like Ron Paul almost when it comes to this. And so because of that, he's been the biggest beneficiary of it, because next to Doug Jones, anybody would look good. And Richard Shelby is certainly benefiting from that politically. In fact, I think if anything, if this winds up being his last term, and I have no idea whether it will be or not, it will certainly sort of help people remember him fondly and sort of enshrine his legacy as a longtime senator of the state of Alabama as being more conservative than he probably actually was, just because now he's standing next to Doug Jones as opposed to Jeff Sessions. And that does make a big difference in the perception and how people see him. But what the real underscore to all of this is that Doug Jones does not see himself as an Alabama senator. He sees himself as a Democrat senator. And that is the reason that he continues to vote with the Democrats, and when Chuck Schumer tells him to jump, he asks how high. And that's the reason that he goes out of state to try to seek endorsements and try to seek different donations coming into his campaign, including outside the country, Taiwan and all kinds of other places. Or Thailand. I don't believe it was Taiwan. I believe it was Thailand. But anyway, the rationale is he sees himself not as a representative of the state of Alabama, but as a representative of the Democrat Party. And in the ads that we showed that he was specifically trying to block Alabama voters from seeing, he portrays himself as such. That if you want the Democrat agenda through, you vote for Doug Jones. He can campaign as a moderate in the state of Alabama when it comes election time all he wants, but when he's fundraising, he knows where his biscuit gets buttered. And he goes outside the state of Alabama because those are the values that he really espouses. He is an instrument of the Democrat Party, not the state of Alabama. All right, that being said, we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to the, because we're running a little low here and I've got a biscuit game to do here in just a second. I do hate that we're going to have to overlook something, but we need to go ahead and go to the daily dose of stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
Now, today's Daily Dose of Stupid, Bernie Sanders has doubled down on defending his wealth. And for those of you who haven't been following the story, I'll just give you a brief little overview of what's been going on here. So there was a New York Times interview that was done with Bernie, and a reporter asked him about some criticism that he had been facing about his own wealth. And it's no surprise. I've been talking about this for a while. I know Andrew Wilkow loves to talk about it. Some other guys that are right here on News Radio 1440, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro. And it's not just conservatives. There are a lot of liberals, even people that are fans of Bernie Sanders, that have been talking about how it seems awful hypocritical for him to, every time he opens his mouth, talk about how evil rich people are, despite the fact that he owns 3 houses and lives a very lush, posh lifestyle. That does seem like an inconsistency, and the reason it seems that way is because it is an inconsistency. And so because of this, the reporter that was interviewing him for the New York Times was actually doing his job and decided to ask a tough question. and ask him about his wealth and everything that he's amassed and everything that he's been able to acquire from a material standpoint. And Bernie responded with this: I wrote a best-selling book. If you write a best-selling book, you can be a millionaire too. So that was Bernie Sanders' answer. But hang on a second. If I write a best-selling book, I can be a millionaire too? I thought the system was rigged. That's what you keep telling us, that the system is rigged against poor people, and that it's these evil 1%ers that are keeping everybody else from amassing any wealth. Well, if that's true, then how did you get wealthy? I mean, it's not like you started out as part of the 1%. I mean, Bernie Sanders wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He wasn't born super poor either. But this isn't a guy who was, the son of a big oil tycoon or anything like that. And so the question then becomes, okay, well, how did Bernie Sanders make all his money in the first place? How did he get wealthy? And the answer to that is he wrote a best-selling book. And he's saying that if you write a best-selling book, you can be a millionaire too. But if the system's rigged against you, then that shouldn't be able to take place. He keeps talking about how there's no upward mobility and the classes are set, and if you're rich, you're going to be rich your whole life, and if you're poor, you're going to be poor your whole life, and there's no way to move up in the system. That doesn't make any sense just by looking at Bernie Sanders' own lifestyle. He is a living, breathing proof that you can rise above your circumstances. Same was true with Barack Obama, who, again, wasn't born poor, but certainly wasn't born wealthy and yet became the president of the United States. You could look at somebody on the conservative side, Ben Carson. Now, he actually was dirt poor and wound up becoming a very wealthy and successful brain surgeon who now works for the Trump administration. So this whole myth that Bernie continues to perpetuate virtually every time he says anything is that you're all stuck in the system and the whole thing's rigged and it's worked against you and evil rich people are taking all your money and stealing from you and you can't get wealthy, you can't improve your own lifestyle without the benevolent government coming down and fixing everything for you. Except Bernie did all that without government help. And now you're looking down on people and saying, well, if you write a best-selling book, then you can be a millionaire. But you keep telling us that we can't, Bernie. You keep telling us that that's an impossibility. You keep telling us that nobody can move up out of their class, that the way that this evil capitalist system is rigged, that nobody can move up or move down or anything. And yet you're living, breathing proof that that is not true. And here's the thing. I don't have a problem with Bernie being wealthy. I don't. I don't have a problem with him having 3 houses. I don't have a problem with him having 20 houses. I really don't. If that's, what Bernie wants to do, that's his business. The reason that I have a problem with it and the reason that I bring it up is not because of the stuff itself. It's because he portrays himself as this warrior for the people. And yet, he doesn't live like the people. He talks about working people and how hard they have it and everything, and how it's evil that all these rich people are amassing all this stuff and they have too much, and it's obscene and unjust for them to have their wealth, and then he has wealth too. He's a member of the 1% that he constantly says are bad people. And he constantly says are screwing everybody else out of having money and out of having things. It doesn't make any sense. And so he gets frustrated with this and actually doubles down on it. There was a community meeting in Gary, Indiana that Bernie Sanders was speaking at, and he said, I didn't know that it was a crime to write a good book, which turns out to be a bestseller. So again, I don't apologize for writing a book that was number 3 on the New York Times bestseller, translated into 5 or 6 languages, and that's that. So that's not even a humble brag, that's just a brag. In fact, it was very Trump-esque. You know how Trump will take a completely unrelated question and turn it into somehow bragging about himself and his accomplishments? That's exactly what Bernie just did. And Trump does it all the time. He'll be asked a question about, I don't know, farm subsidies in Iowa, and he'll talk about, how rich he is and how he amassed a great real estate empire in New York, and you're just sitting there scratching your head like, I think he just went completely off topic just so we could talk about how rich he is and how well he's doing. That's exactly what Bernie Sanders just did. Bernie just is like, well, if you write one that's number 3 on the New York Best Times and it's translated into these different languages, like, Bernie, we're talking about your wealth. We're not talking about how successful your book was. But nonetheless, it does illustrate something, though. And that is, Bernie is fine with criticizing wealth, as long as it's everybody's wealth except for his. His wealth is the only wealth people aren't allowed to criticize. He gets flustered and frustrated and upset because he sees the contradiction himself. Even if he doesn't know that he sees it, I think subconsciously he understands that there is this massive contradiction that he's living out. And that's the reason that he gets so frustrated. And by the way, I'm using an article from CNN that was talking about how he was visually frustrated by this and how he got flustered by the question. So this isn't like Breitbart or The Blaze or Daily Wire saying this. This is CNN. And they're saying that Bernie Sanders gets upset about this, and he gets upset when this topic of conversation is broken up. It's because he knows there's a level of cognitive dissonance in his mind about how he lives versus how he talks about how evil and bad rich people are and how people should take that money away and give it to others. He's fine with people doing that for other people. He's just not fine with them doing it to him. See, his wealth is fine. His wealth he earned. His wealth is the result of his hard work that he put into the book. Everybody else's wealth, well, they just stole that from people. That's just evil, nasty, dirty money that they took from other people and they exploited workers. Well, how do you know that? Are you really going to say that you know every single millionaire, every single rich person in the world is evil just because they have wealth and they must have screwed somebody else out of their money to be able to get it? Because that's what Bernie Sanders says all the time. And yet when it's his wealth, oh, that's clean money. That I earned that. This is what's so hilarious about this. This is a dude that was a lazy freeloader his entire life, didn't have a real job until he was 40, and even then that job was a government job. He's never worked in the private sector. And this illustrates a problem that socialists have in general, people that are proponents of big government. They hate the free market, but they always leave at least a little bit of the free market for themselves. A perfect example of this is that Democrats, by and large, there are exceptions, I'm sure, but by and large, they tell people that it's wrong for them to not engage in the public school system and that you ought to be locked into the district that you're in, that you shouldn't have school choice. They oppose things like voucher programs, but where do their kids go to school? Private schools. Even a lot of the ones that specifically work in education in the Department of Education, their kids are still going to the ritzy private schools that are not beholden to their rules. See, it's kind of like a person that runs a restaurant, but that person that runs the restaurant is too good for that restaurant because they know that their restaurant sucks, and so they don't eat there themselves. Never eat in a restaurant the owner would not eat in, because chances are it's either really terrible or dirty or something, but the point is there's something wrong with the way that organization is being run. And the thing is, the Democrats know that things like the education system are run horribly, and that's why their kids aren't going to it. See, they want to keep just enough of the free market for them to use, but not everybody else. Socialism is for the masses, the unwashed people, you little people out there in flyover country. It's not for the socialist. Bernie wants everybody else's money taken away, but not his. See, his money he earned. His money is his, and he built that. Everybody else's money, oh, well, screw them. They probably got it from taking it from somebody else or taking it from working people. See, there's a massive inconsistency here. And what's so hilarious about this is that when we're talking about other people's wealth, then all of a sudden Bernie is a socialist. But when we're talking about Bernie's wealth, well, all of a sudden he sounds like Ron Paul or Ted Cruz or Mike Lee or Thomas Sowell. Then all of a sudden he sounds like a capitalist because his wealth, that he doesn't really want to part with. And that's the massive inconsistency of him and of socialism in general. They want everybody's money taken away from them and redistributed to somebody else except their own. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
The chaplain's report today, I don't want to delve too far into the realm of politics because I do want to keep the chaplain's report primarily based on the scripture, but I did want to mention that, of course, today is tax day. It is April 15th. And, of course, we all know that that's a day where we have to pay our taxes, but I noticed a trend on Twitter's hashtag for tax day. And it's something that I've noticed for some time now. I just scrolled through it, and one thing that I noticed is that people that tended to lean left, when they were talking about tax day, they were talking about how evil it was and unfair it was, and how all the tax breaks that were brought about by the Trump administration were just brought about to help rich people, even though everybody got pretty much the same level of tax cut. It was all pretty much 2%. It was a little bit more than others based on your tax bracket, but overall it was about a 2% cut for everybody. But they were always using these subjective numbers for it. In other words, they were saying that X amount of people are unhappy with the new tax system, or X amount of people oppose tax cuts for the wealthy. Again, despite the fact that the tax cuts really affected every tax bracket. But nonetheless, it was always something subjective. Now, on the right, a lot of the people that were talking about it talked about objective numbers. In other words, they were giving new job numbers and job numbers since the tax cuts went through, and how much better business is doing and how much better the economy is doing. Something that's concrete and real and substantial. I'm not saying that people's feelings don't matter. I'm just saying that when you compare it to hard facts of how well a system is working, as opposed to how well people feel about how it's working, those are two entirely separate things. And the same is true for the scripture. The same is true for the Bible. Because there are a lot of people that don't feel good about certain verses. There are a lot of people that don't feel good about certain parts of the Bible. Generally the parts that include them doing something that they don't like. And that could be anything from, being baptized and dedicating your life to Christ and foregoing all of your sinful urges and even sometimes your innocent urges if they interfere with your connection with God. Or things like loving your enemy, things that are very difficult for people to do, and they don't want to spend much time on that because they know how hard it is to actually accomplish it. But nonetheless, there is a tendency to do this. With Scripture, there is a tendency to avoid things that we don't like. There is a tendency to avoid obeying God when it is something that is unpopular for us to have to do. But this is not something that is new to mankind. And I'm so grateful that the Bible has a habit of telling us that the problems that we have and the issues that we take with one another, they're really not that new. They've kind of been around for a really long time. And this problem is no different, in fact, specifically relating to taxes. Let's look at Matthew 22:17 through 22, and for whatever reason my graphics aren't working, so I'm going to have to just read this to you. Matthew 22:17 through 22, if you want to open up your Bible and read along. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to give a poll tax to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their malice and said, Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me a coin used for the poll tax. And they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Now this is one of those occasions where the Pharisees came to give Jesus a question, and they weren't really concerned with the answer. They were really trying to trap him in a situation that he couldn't win regardless of what he said, and this is no different. See, they were thinking, okay, well, if he says that we shouldn't pay the tax, then all we have to do is tell the Roman officials, hey, guy is a religious teacher, and he's telling people not to pay taxes. And yes, Romans do take that very seriously. That would be the equivalent to him inciting a riot or breaking up the peace, and then Rome would intervene and take care of their Jesus problem. They wouldn't have to deal with Jesus anymore because the Romans would deal with him. If he answers the other way, and he says, well, you should pay your taxes, then all they have to do is go to the Jews and say, see, this Jesus guy, he's not about overthrowing Rome. He's saying that you should just bow down and kiss the feet of your Roman masters. And so either way, they won. They either have Rome going after him, or they have him less popular amongst the Jews. Either way, they can use his response as a weapon. And then Jesus does something that they do not expect, which is take a third option. Explain to them why they should pay their taxes. And the way that chapter continues on, if you look at the very next verse that we didn't get a chance to read, it says that they went away, which I kind of picture in my head, and maybe it's just me, but like a mic drop moment, that as soon as Jesus answers, the Pharisees are just like, oh, well, there's not really a good response to that, so let's just walk away. I mean, I picture it as there being no discussion after that they just walked away immediately after. But anyway, that's the thing about this, is that they were hung up on trying to trap Jesus, and because of that, they didn't see the obvious answer. And the reason that this answer is so profound is because Jesus goes back to a very real but very simple fundamental truth, which is there are certain powers in existence that God has put into place. And as long as we are following God and there is not a law that contradicts God's law, we are to follow that to the best of our ability. It makes us better neighbors and better followers of God because we can better represent his kingdom here on earth. But I want you to notice how he answered that and the explanation that he gave. He said, give me a coin. And then he looks at the coin and sees that Caesar's inscription on it and asks them to repeat that for him. And follows that up with saying, well, then give to Caesar what is rightfully his, and also give to God what is rightfully his. You see, Caesar's inscription was on the coin. Then the question becomes, okay, well, whose inscription is on us? And the answer should be obvious. It's God. We're made in his image. We are created of him. Our life, our light, our intellect, everything that we have comes from the Almighty Creator. And if that's the case, if Caesar is the one that commissioned those coins, and it is by his authority that the Roman tax collectors collect those coins as a tax, then doesn't it make sense that something that is made in the image of God, that is given his inscription and his likeness, and that the whole institution of humanity comes from him, just like the institution of Roman currency came from the emperor, that God has a certain level of authority over us that we ought to observe and that we ought to adhere to? You see, if we're adhering to the advice that Jesus is giving here, sure, with our physical governments who institute currency, we are expected to obey and be obedient as much as we can and still follow God's word. And that's an institution that God himself set up and wants us to be good citizens of our nation. But ultimately, he also wants us to remember that if we're rendering to God the things that are his, that means the government may get our money, and they may have a certain level of loyalty that's expected of us, but God should get our everything. God should have our absolute loyalty, because at the end of the day, it's his inscription that's on us. We belong to him, and we need to live a life that reflects that truth. Everything that we do, everything that we are, needs to be dedicated to him every day. And no, we're not going to reach that goal, and it's something that's very lofty and difficult for a flawed human being to accomplish. But that should be what we should be working on every day. And if we do that and we continue to strive to be the kind of Christian, to live in the image of Christ and to follow his example, then we will be rendering unto God that which is his. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.